I don't make it a particular secret that I buy into the occult pretty hard. I can acknowledge the silliness of it and try to keep my wits about me, but at the end of the day, I enjoy engaging with the spooky side of things. As such, when my fiancé's friends decided to burst out a Ouija board, I was excited to see if anything would happen. Things technically happened, but nothing that I couldn't write off as a nonsense at first. I was a little less enthralled as I moved to the other side of the table and my fiancé hopped on the board next. Curious to see what might happen for her, most of her extended family doesn't speak English, so they were fully prepared for that to be an issue. Regardless, the planchette mostly stayed around yes and no, and seemed to avoid spelling things. The spirit confirmed that it hadn't gotten to meet my fiancé, but that it was familiar with her and approved of our getting married. I confirmed it was a great aunt, and then they asked its name. For the sake of maintaining some shred of anonymity, suffice it to say the name was not a Spanish one. No one in my fiancé's family has that name or had it, but it happened to be the name of someone in my family. A great aunt that died when I was quite young. I've never mentioned this woman or her name to my fiancé. I've never had reason to. I've definitely never mentioned her to any of my fiancé's friends. It could have been a total coincidental fluke, but I was floored. Nearly fell out of my chair stumbling away from the table. I don't know if this qualifies as a ghost story, but I would say so. In 2013, I believe it was Thanksgiving Day, my sister and I found out we were both pregnant. We were both very excited to be pregnant together. We are the closest out of the 4 siblings of us, and thought it would be great to share this experience. I had already had 2 children, and she had 1. So the plan was to go to each other's doctor's appointments and have a baby shower together. In January was my first ultrasound, and she wasn't going to miss that. So we went to the appointment and she sat next to me excited to see her new niece or nephew. The ultrasound technician came in and began. Like I said, I had 2 children and my sister had 1 already. So looking at the screen, you could see my child. But something wasn't right. I couldn't hear anything and thought the tech might have the volume down. Then I stared at the screen, but no movement. I looked at my sister and I could tell she had the same concerns. The tech was nervous by this point and kept moving the wand around saying something, but I couldn't tell you what until she said, "Let me go get the doctor." We both knew why. We sat there in silence until they both returned and the doctor came. "Ma'am, your baby has no heartbeat and has passed. I want to add that my sister is a very soft-hearted person and I knew the loss of my child would crush her. On the other hand, I'm not bothered by death as badly. Yes, this was my unborn child, but I have thicker skin when it came to this, and at the time I was okay." Fast forward beginning of February, I was scheduled for a D&C. This is a surgery where the doctors remove the fetus. I did not want my sister to go to this, because this was not a happy time. My mother told me she would go with me. We're also very close, so that was great. The day of my surgery, however, my mother woke up with the flu and was sick. My dad reluctantly stepped in. Not because he doesn't love me, but because this was awkward for him. I remember laying on the bed before the surgery, my dad next to me in the chair, and we were watching the news. They were calling for snow, which didn't happen often in the city that we were in. Then the nurse came to wheel me to surgery, In this part of the hospital, all the patients were in rooms against the back wall with all the glass fronts and a curtain for privacy. At the end of the hall were a set of double doors. You went right and then immediately left into another set of double doors to the surgery suite. I remember climbing onto the surgery table myself because I am very stubborn. The last thing I remember is the anesthesiologist talking to me and then telling me to count back from 10. I remember getting to 9. The next thing I knew, I woke up in recovery feeling like I had been hit by a truck. My throat hurt, my body ached. I would also like to point out that my dad's side of the family doesn't do well with anesthesia. The doctor came to see me and said they had put a tube in my throat because I stopped breathing, but everything else was fine. So a couple hours later, I was released. I just wanted to go to bed. We had just gotten out of the hospital driveway into the first stoplight, and it began to snow. We had a 30-minute drive and had plenty of time for small talk and enjoying the snow. We arrived at home, and I asked my mother if she could watch my children so I could take a nap. By this time, she was feeling better and so happy to do so. Now here's where the ghost story came to play. As I said before, I wasn't emotionally torn up by the loss or very religious at this point in my life. I crawled into my bed and went to sleep. Then I started dreaming. In the dream, I was back in that pre-surgery room with my gown on and those fuzzy socks they give you. But now, I was alone in the room, standing at the door, looking down the hall. I could see myself. Well, the back of me walking down the hall to the double doors. And with me holding my hand was a little boy, about 1 year old, curly blonde hair, jeans on, but I could see his little diaper sticking out, a long-sleeve burgundy shirt, holding a sippy cup in the other arm. We go to the double doors. The doors opened and all I saw was an extremely bright light and heard a voice saying, "I'll take it from here." I woke up ruined emotionally. I was crying and heartbroken, but happy all at once. My mother came to see what was wrong because she said I hadn't been asleep that long and thought I was in pain from the surgery. I told her about the dream, and she hugged me and started to cry with me. I know I got the chance to see my child. Now every year on Mother's Day, no matter how cold, a tiny blue butterfly always finds me. I know some people will say I'm looking for it, but I know it's my son coming to visit me. It always gets super close to me and stays for a bit, then flies off. It gives me so much peace. The last thing I would like to add, after I had my surgery, my sister went to the doctor, and her baby had passed as well. I felt guilty, because I feel like she was so upset about my loss that it caused hers. This happened back in 2017. I had posted this story on Reddit before about a year ago, but I left out some pretty important things and details. So I'm reposting this on a different subreddit with more information. I was about 11 years old when this happened. I was living in an old apartment building in Spokane, Washington with my mom and little sister, who was in 2nd grade at the time. I have always been obsessed with the paranormal, and I would spend my time on YouTube listening to ghost stories and things like that. It was during the Halloween season, so we decided to go to Spirit Halloween, which is something we did every year. We decided to buy this tablecloth that had a printing of a Ouija board on it. I had always wanted a Ouija board, but my mom was kind of religious, so she was hesitant. Since this wasn't a real Ouija board, my mom decided to buy it anyways. I still played to try and play with it anyway and see if I could summon anything, but I never got around to it. So we just ended up hanging it up in the room, and that was it for a while. A few months later, I decided to get up early and go into the living room to watch cartoons. It was still dark outside, and my mom and sister were asleep. All was well at first. Then that's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black shadow figure dash from the kitchen into the hallway that led to our bedrooms. I instantly spun around and faced the direction where I saw the figure. Of course, there was nothing there. I shrugged it off and thought I could have just been seeing things in the dark. Fast forward again about a month later, and that's when things start to go down. Me and my sister got home from school, and that's when my mom starts to tell us that strange things were happening in our apartment, such as her thumb going randomly numb for no reason at all, the TV and radio messing up and becoming distorted, and our pet birds that we had locked in a cage were freaking out like something else was in the apartment. I wasn't really scared at first. In fact, I was excited. I always dreamed of having a paranormal encounter, and now it was finally happening. But soon I would learn that the paranormal is no laughing matter, and it isn't something to be all that excited about. The evening things got even stranger. My mom said that her and my sister were going to go and take our dog Sophie on a walk. I said I wanted to stay behind to see if any paranormal stuff would happen, and my mom was okay with it. After that, I was left in the apartment alone, and I was just sitting there again watching the show Adventure Time on our TV. Suddenly, my walkie-talkie that was sitting right by me sprung to life, and a man's voice began talking from the other end. This scared the shit out of me, and I instantly ran outside to meet up with my mom and sister to tell them what happened. She said it could have been that someone was on the same channel as us. Plus, we lived right next to the railroad, and sometimes there will be workers up there with radios. But that didn't make any sense. First off, you could clearly see the railroad outside of the living room window, and there was no one out there. And my walkie-talkie had been turned off. So I have no idea how it could have just randomly turned on like that out of nowhere. When we got back up to the apartment, the TV was all distorted, and our pet birds were going crazy. And not long after, I started to get an extreme pain build up in my chest. I don't know how to describe the pain, but it felt like something was pressing hard against my chest. The same evening my sister ran out of our room. We shared a room, by the way. She said that she saw a faceless man standing in the room, but when we looked in there, there was nothing. She was too scared to go back in our room, and I started getting a bit spooked as well. Soon my mom was able to convince her everything was fine and she was able to go to sleep. That night I woke up at 2 a.m. Whenever me and my sister would wake up in the night, we would go into my mom's room and sleep there. My sister had woken up before me because she was already in there, so I went and joined them. All three of us were awake and tried to go back to sleep, but that's when things got started. We could hear what sounded like footsteps in our house. They were in the kitchen and then the living room. We also had a huge shelf of movies in the living room, and it sounded like someone was pulling them off the shelf. On top of all this, we could hear pots and pans in the kitchen, and my walkie-talkie in the living room with that same man speaking through it. I don't know what the voice was saying, but I could clearly hear someone talking. I don't know exactly how long this went on, but it felt like at least an hour or more. It couldn't have been our dog or our cat making the noises, since they both were in the room with us, and our birds were locked in the cage. The next morning, everything mostly went back to normal. That was the last time we heard those noises, and nothing else strange really happened. What was weird was, despite the noises, nothing seemed to be out of place. None of our movie cases were scattered or anything, but I knew it wasn't simply a dream, because my sister remembers it too. Soon after, my mom threw the Ouija board tablecloth in the trash, and refuses to buy anything else like that to this day. But after that incident, There is 2 things that occurred related to the incident. Every night after that, I would always wake up at 2 a.m., but only if I slept in my room. And it was always at that same time, or around the same time for some weird reason. And my sister didn't stop seeing that faceless man for at least another 2 years, even after we moved from that apartment. She would see him in the dark corridors of rooms, but would always be gone after she looked away. She doesn't see him anymore though, and thankfully I've been able to sleep better without waking up every night. But I still think about this incident sometimes. I have had people say to me before that it could have been a bear or a person and not anything else. But there is no way it could have been a bear, since we were living in the middle of downtown Spokane in a 4-story apartment. We were living in the 4th story, and the only way in our apartment is through the door, which instantly locks when it's closed and needs a key to be opened, which my mom had with her at all times. You couldn't climb through the windows without breaking them, and you would have to scale the side of the building to the 4th floor. So this is also why it couldn't have been a person. But all I know is we didn't just imagine this, and something had to have been there. My brother brought this up in a car while we were exchanging spooky stories on a late night drive. But one that really stood out to me and sent chills up my spine was a particular incident in which he claims to have very briefly seen an image of John Lennon on the wall in the reflection of a window in a spare bedroom at my grandparents' house at ungodly hours while he was visiting home. He says he was listening to the podcast laying in bed in the spare room where he soon drifted off to a shallow sleep. He woke up to find he had left the lights on and the curtains open. Everybody else in the house was asleep. As he focused on the window next to him, he swears for a brief moment a reflection of John Lennon was visible in the window, plastered onto the wall opposite side window. My brother isn't the type of guy to bullshit. He's not the creative type. I can't see him making shit up on the spot. He's 32. This apparently happened when he was 25. The house is old and the bedroom belonged to my deceased uncle when he was a child, who was a massive fan of the Beatles and apparently had a Beatles poster in that very room, on that very wall. This info came from my grandmother after he told her about the incident the next day. This may or may not be relevant, but the street and house itself are built on a famine mass graveyard in Roscommon, Ireland. I'm thinking some sort of window into the past? My dead uncle trying to communicate with him? Or maybe just a hallucination in a half-awake daze. This scared me way too much than it should had. I'm new to the field of healthcare and have been working in a nursing home for about 6 months now. I don't know if I necessarily believe in ghosts, but I definitely believe in energy. I've asked lots of my coworkers to share me all their stories about our campus. I figure so many people have died here over the years, there's bound to be stories. I've heard the garden variety, little girl visits residents before they're about to die, and cold spot on the 3rd floor near the elevator stories, but nothing really scared me. One night, on a slow 3rd shift, me and a coworker used the energy-filled TikTok filter to see if we could find a ghost in the dining room. And there were some creepy impressions on the chairs of residents who died. Around the time my first resident on hospice was dying, the nurse was going over death procedures in a report. A lot of us were new, so she was filling us in. She told us to always speak to the body as if it could respond, even if they hadn't spoken in days. even if they were dead. We assumed that it was a sign of respect to the resident and family members that might be in the room. The nurse clarified that it was because they believed the body might still be able to hear us. I was surprised that the nurse would state something of such subjective matter, but she went on to tell us that this is the stance that our company takes. As far as they're concerned, ghosts are real. It was strange to hear a company acknowledge the existence of ghosts. We were also told not to open the windows in a dying resident's room because it might go against the family's wishes. I asked for clarification, and the nurse explained that opening the window lets out the spirit, and sometimes the families want the spirit to hold on. She said the co-workers had been written up for doing that before. I kept that in the back of my mind. Over the next few weeks, the resident on hospice deteriorated. They've been bedbound for almost a month. We positioned them every 2 hours to reduce bed sores. Eventually, they stopped responding to cues. They hadn't eaten for more than a week. They were given a morphine drip for pain because they couldn't take it any other way, but they were still holding on. The family had been spending the entire month with them on shifts, and we kind of got the impression that the resident didn't want to pass in front of their family. The family went to visit the resident's wife's grave, and the nurse told us apparently they asked the spirit of the wife to return to the resident's room with them and give them permission to pass. They still held on, and the family all went home for the first night since they went on hospice. I had that resident's care for the night, and I briefly thought about opening the window. Since they were unable to follow cues, I had another co-worker in assisting me. I asked her if she'd ever opened a window on a resident, and she said no, but she told me a story of another co-worker of ours that had. Apparently, they spoke to the resident and told them it was okay to leave, opened the window, left the room to put some towels in the wash, and when they came back, the resident was passed away. I asked if she thought we should, knowing we could get in trouble for it. After all, I'd been told about it with the explicit directions not to. But we decided to open the window. I did it, and my coworker spoke to the resident. It was surprised about how affectionately she spoke to them, because even when they were more active, none of us particularly were close with them. She told them their family loved them very much, and they'd been taken care of and safe, that it was okay for them to let go, and we just didn't want them to be in pain anymore. We left the room for a moment thinking that they want some privacy, and we returned after about a minute. It was a cold night out, so we didn't want too much cold air to come into the room and actually harm the resident. They were still visibly breathing, so we shrugged and continued care. After we were done with the room, I continued about my night. Not an hour later, the nurse told us that they had passed. I still don't believe what I believe, but it was wild for the company to take such a strong position on ghosts, and then for their specific lore to be backed up in real life. I guess ghosts can't go through walls. I'll update if I ever experience anything firsthand. Update. Thanks everyone for the responses on the last post. I said I'd update if I ever experienced anything firsthand, and a while ago I experienced a full body apparition. I'll set the scene first, since it's necessary to explain how I do not believe what I saw was a living person. Our nursing home is basically one giant hallway with many rooms on both sides. I was exiting one resident's room after completing care very late at night, about 10:30 p.m. After 8 p.m., half of the fluorescent lights shut off, so this end of the hallway was very dark. I was near the end of the building, with only 2 rooms to the right of me, and the rest of the building to the left. After cares are completed, you're supposed to shut the resident's door, and since most people like to go to bed earlier than the room I was in, all the doors were already shut. All the doors are fireproof, rated for up to 1.5 hours. so they were very large and heavy doors. It's quite difficult to shut them without making a sound, and we often have residents yell at us if we actually slam the doors too hard. They also have a tendency of closing their own door and not staying propped open. With it so late, most of the second shift had already left for the night. It was only me and 2 other PCAs in that side of the building, and knew the relative location of each one. As I was maybe about 5 feet from the door, I saw something walk in front of it in the hallway, pacing from left to right at a medium pace. They were about 5 feet in height, hunched over, and looked to be wearing dark blue. As the hallway was so dark, I couldn't make out their face or any details. Nothing struck me as off about the encounter at first. I simply thought it was a coworker because one of us was wearing dark blue scrubs that night. As soon as they passed by the door, I rushed up to it and peeked my head out to see who it was, out of curiosity. But there was no one there. The end of the hall is directly to my right, so there was nowhere they could have gone. All the doors to the other rooms were closed. They couldn't have ducked into a room and shut the door that quickly or quietly. They simply walked past the door and disappeared. I was very shaken up, but didn't say anything, and went on about my night, trying to find some kind of rational explanation for what had happened. Later on, my supervisor came to me with wide eyes and told me she'd felt something. I still hadn't told her anything of what I saw. Basically, she'd gone into one of the rooms on the right of where I saw the apparition a while after I had finished care, and she felt like someone was staring at her the whole time. So to the extent she kept turning around to see if someone was there. This particular room is the last room in the hallway and has the rare feature of 2 exterior walls being on the corner of the building. Twice as many windows as the other rooms. I shared with her what I saw. We were pretty spooked out, so we stayed close together for the rest of the night. Around that same time, the resident in between the room where I saw the apparition and where my supervisor felt like she was being watched, started to decline and eventually passed away. Before his death, he would tell us he saw his late wife watching him from outside of his window.